Where were you born and raised?
I was born in Price.
I was born in Clawson. That's Clawson, Utah, in Emery County, and it was a little farm town.
Oh, okay.
And
And she was born on a kitchen table
Wow.
at the house.
yes, I was born on a kitchen table, and I was the fourth child in the family. And my family was very poor, and I think at the time they were probably living with relatives. And what else do I need to know?
That's about it. She only lived in Emery County for a few years. When she was about 4 years old, her family moved to Sunnyside. Her dad got a job in the coal mines up there, and she spent her first till she was 9 years old in Sunnyside, and then she moved up. She lived out by the fairgrounds here. So
Yeah.
I was born in the hospital in Price, and my family lived in Wellington.
I just want to make sure you're getting this.
Yeah.
Okay.
I grew up in the little town of Wellington, and on a little farm, small farm.
Tell a bit about your mother and father.
My father was married one time before, and he had a daughter, but his wife died giving birth, and then he got remarried to my mother, and they had 6 kids. I was number 4, and I was basically raised by my sister. She was the oldest. She's 5 years older than I am. My mother, by that time when I was born, I guess she was retired. So my sister took care of me a lot.
Her older sister. Yeah.
My older sister.
Okay.
My dad was in the Navy in World War II. He had quite some experiences. He was in a couple of the biggest naval battles. Well, he was in the biggest naval battle ever fought, and I really admired him. And when I grew up, he was a deputy sheriff. His picture's on the wall over there with those guys. He was a deputy sheriff for Carbon County for several years, and he was actually the president of the Utah Peace Officers Association for about 4 or 5 years. And so he had a pretty good law enforcement career. My mother was just a homemaker, and I grew up in a family with 5 boys, no sisters. And later on, I had 4 sons and no daughters. So this is the only woman I've ever had. no brothers, no sisters, and no daughters at all.
I was the 4th child of 6 kids. Mm-hmm. And I grew up a tomboy, and I wore cowboy boots and Levi's my whole life. And I could ride horses and do things that most boys didn't do. Yeah. Because I was just rough and clumsy.
She was a real cowgirl. I mean, she didn't, not in the rodeos and stuff. She was just, she herded cows when she was young for the neighbors, and she started out on a Shetland pony, and then went to a pony, and then a regular horse, and she spent all her time out on the flats out there herding cows when she was younger, right up until she was in high school.
He doesn't have a clue. He's telling my story, and he doesn't have a clue what I did.
Well, tell us.
That's true. I had a job when I was 8 years old, and our neighbors had milk cows. He had like 13 milk cows. My dad got me this job with our neighbor, and I had to walk through 3 wire gates. I'd take them down, put them back up, and then I'd go get the cows, and I was scared to death of those cows. I was 9 years old, and so I was so afraid of the cows that the owner would turn them out to go, and they knew where to go. And so I would come behind him, but then I would run clear way out of around him and get to the gate and open it and swing the gate open, and then I'd go hide so the cows could go through. And I did that 3 times before, and then we got to the canal, and then I had to take them down the canal a ways, and they'd cross the canal. And the first little while I didn't have a horse. I was on foot. It was a little while later my dad got me a Shetland pony. And I had to learn how to ride a Shetland pony bareback. No saddle, just a bridle. There you go. And So I would get on the Shetland pony and we'd start down the gravel road because there's all cactus and bushes off to the side of the road. So I had to stay on the gravel road and the Shetland would start trotting. As soon as he start trotting, I'd fall off. And I was so skinned up, and I would just sit there and cry for a while. And I'd always keep hold of the rein so he didn't get away and that. And I'd sit there and cry, and then I'd get back on, and we'd go a little ways farther. And we'd go down the road, I'd bounce up and down, I'd fall off again. But I learned to ride that pony bareback. And I had that job with our neighbor until I left home. It was like, I was 9 and I left home when I was 18, so 9 years. And I had that job, and they paid me once a month, and they always paid me $20, and they'd give me a slab of bread, and that they were Italians, and Mrs. Ruggieri, she made bread, and the loaves was this big around, and I'd have this big piece of bread with butter on it, and that's what I would get paid. I'd give the $20 to my mother, but I would eat the bread. And that was my growing up process. I had a really good life because we lived in Sunnyside till I was like 9. No, sorry,
Yeah.
9. Yeah, till I was 9. Then we moved out by the fairgrounds, only on this side of the canal. So to get over to the fairgrounds, my dad built a walk across bridge. We could walk across there, and I could take my horse across there. All that flat out there where the fairgrounds is, all that out there from Pinnacle Peak all the way across there, that belonged to me. That
There
was
was no
my
houses, there was no
playground.
roads, there was no nothing out there.
And
Just,
living out there, I just didn't have any friends that would come out that far because their moms wouldn't take them out there. And anyways, like that. So I spent my whole time out there with me and my horse, my dog. And I just loved it. I was free. I didn't have to listen to anybody's problems. I didn't have to do anything. I could just, the guy, I herded their cows. I'd go to their house and get their cows and bring them through 3 gates and cross the canal with them, and then I'd watch them all day long, plus our cows, and sometimes we had sheep too. So I grew up on my horse, and I had a wonderful life. I didn't have to put up with any trouble.
Then she met me, and she's been putting up a while.
And then I met him. After high school, I went to work, and I worked as a car op. And that's, there was Daddy-O's drive-in, I would just take food out to the people. That's car op. And then after that, my dad took me to Salt Lake we was gonna have this type test that we could take. And I passed the type test really good, because by this time I'm in high school, getting graduated and whatever. And I got really high on the type test. And so after that, then I was just wondering, where am I going to get a job? Because I was a car hop at our little cafe thing. And I was kind of tired of that, and I wanted a real job. And there was a little teeny ad in the paper wanting somebody to come and take a type test. And I didn't know what the type test was for, what they were trying to get at, but I thought, I can type. So I went to my dad and I says, I need to go get this type test. And it's clear up in Ogden, I think it was.
Ogden.
Ogden. And I didn't know where Ogden was. And at that time, the road that went north up to Salt Lake and there, that road went in and out of every canyon in the Emprise Canyon. It's not like is now with the 4-lane highway. It was a 2-lane little, And most of the times when cars would go up that, they'd get to the summit, and there'd be cars all lined up on the side of the road where their cars had overheated,
Oh, wow.
and they had to wait for their car to cool down so they can keep going. But my dad, I asked him if he'd take me to Ogden. He asked me, he says, "Do you know where Ogden's at?" And I says, "Yeah, it's up there by that town, Provo." And he laughed at me, and he says, "No, I think I better take you." I said, "Okay." So he took me to Ogden, and before I could ask that, I called my sister. I says, "Will you come and take that type test with me? Because if I just go, I know they won't take me. But if you go too, then maybe they'll take us." And so she went with me, but she never did do anything with it. But from that one little type test, I ended up getting a job with the Internal Revenue Service, doing income taxes. And that set me off on my career.
She was a key punch operator for the first computers they had up there.
Oh, wow.
That's what she was doing.
It was
Key punch.
that room was just a great big thing, like it was a barn-like type building, just a big metal building, and from one end of it to the other end, the people down at the other end, that's how big it was. The other people looked like they were this big, and it was just clear full of people in there, women mostly, and that's when we first started with computers, and that's what we were doing. We were putting in all the information from these income taxes of everybody into computers, and the computers at that time were the size of a big size refrigerator.
Yeah.
I ended up working at Green River Missile Base as a secretary, key punch operator, and I did the payroll for the Atlantic Research Corporation, a big...
She was actually the office manager. She was 19 years old. She was the office manager there.
Yeah.
They hired her over the phone from California.
Oh,
They couldn't find a key punch operator, and they found out she was one, and they got in touch with her. They hired her over the telephone. They just said, "Go down to the missile base, and when you get to the front gate, tell them who you are, and here's the guy you need to talk to." And they put her right to work. And she was pretty proud to work in the defense with the defense contractor there during that war, because it was like she was part of the effort too. They were testing. I don't know if you were ever aware of that, but they were testing Atlas missiles down there. Was it Athena missiles? They were shooting them from Green River, Utah, right here down to White Sands, New Mexico, right over the top of Lake Powell and Canyonlands and stuff. And she was up here where they were launching the missiles. And
The missiles went clear down to White Sands, New Mexico.
wow.
And I had all of our grandkids believing in, for a long time until they grew up, that she was they said, "What did Grandma do at the missile base?" And I told them she used to light the fuses. But she didn't. She was in the office.
And then after we got married, then I was a mommy, so I stayed home. We ended up having 4 babies. And then after that, I was taking the kids up to the highway to put them on the bus, because the buses didn't come down here like they do now. And so I took them up then. The woman driver, she told me, she says, "What are you doing nowadays?" And I says, "Oh, I'm just, Mom, and the kids are in school." And she says, "Why don't you come and drive school bus with us?" And I said, "Oh, I don't know." She says, "You can do that." And I knew, well, heck, I've been driving that water truck forever. What's a school bus? We lived out by where the rodeo arena is. We lived out there, and there wasn't water lines out there where we lived. We had to haul water in a water truck with a big tank on the back of it. And when I was 13, my dad had me driving that water truck. I didn't even have a driver's license yet. But I was driving that water truck, and I'd have to drive it down into town, down there by where the post office is now. There used to be a building just beyond that on First south, and you pull in there, and I could turn the truck around behind that building and pull out, and then I could get the big hose and crawl out on top of the tank and put it in there and turn the water on, fill that tank full of water, and then I'd drive the truck back to our house. And to get to our house where Third Ward is, if you look, there's a going right straight down from there. There's a bridge that crosses the river. It's a metal bridge, and it's just big enough for one car. But I would go across that, and then go up the hill, you know, to go to the rodeo grounds. And to go up that and take it to the house. And then we had a tank at the house that we put the water in, and then it was plumbed into the house, so that we had running water at the house. This was very primitive at the time. And my dad took me to show me what to do in the truck. And when we come down the hill and that, to go to get the water for the first time, to show me where it's at and how to do it, he told me, he said, don't ever try to shift gears when you're on this hill. You get it in the gear you need, and then you climb it, or if coming down, you shift it down into the gear you need to come down. He says, don't ever try to shift gears in the middle of that hill. And the reason why is if you miss the gear, you're freewheeling it, and you can't, and your brakes aren't going to hold you back. And so he taught me a lot about driving truck and that. And anyway, my boss, it was Bill Gentry, and he was the gruffest guy in this world. And we got up there, and I'm gonna try to get to be a bus driver. And anyway, he comes out there and he says, come here a minute. I walked over there, and I'm standing there looking up at him, and he said, I don't think you can drive school bus. And I says, why not? And he said, well, you're too short. He says, you won't even be able to reach the clutch on this bus. And I says, really? And he says, yeah. He says, you're just too short. And about that time, John Anselmo come walking in, and he's an inch shorter than me. And I caught him, and I says, John, do you drive school bus? He says, yes, ma'am, I do. And I says, can you reach the clutch? Yes, ma'am, I do. And so I turned to my boss, and I says, Bill, I says, I'm as tall as he is. If he can reach the clutch, I can. And he says, go talk to Thelma, she'll give you a job.
What is a favorite childhood memory?
My favorite childhood memory would be if when I was a kid, I had a Shetland pony to start with, then I had a horse, and it was just with that horse that I grew up on, both of them. And I think that would be probably the best thing I can think of. We had the 4 boys, and they were the life of my party. I'm not kidding you. I had so much fun with those 4 babies.
She was a little boy too. It was great.
You know, they were spoiled rotten. I mean, not really spoiled, but we did everything. We got them. I got them. A Shetland pony, and all of that. And they had all of that stuff, and they had BB guns.
They had go-karts when they were 10.
Oh my goodness!
It was they
had a rich life.
And there wasn't that many people lived out here then. They had that road there to themselves,
Yeah.
and they'd go clear down around there, that go-kart, and they had this little dog, and that little dog, I named him Elvis, because he'd sit out on the corner of the house there and just howl until
when
he
they
was just.
when they would go to school,
They would
that
go to
little
school,
dog would just
or
howl out there.
they'd get on their go-kart and they'd leave him, and he would just sit out there and just howl like that. So I said, you know, his name's Elvis, he's out there singing all the time. So he was a little dog. We had a lot of good dogs. That's, you know, our kids, they had a Shetland pony. And he didn't know that I got him a Shetland pony, but
Surprise!
somebody over in Carbonville had a Shetland pony for sale.
Yeah.
And so I didn't have a way to haul it.
Yeah.
I had a car. So I went over there and I put the Shetland pony in the back seat. And we drove home with that Shetland pony.
Hey.
Hey, where
Got 'em home
there's a
safe.
will, there's a way.
Yeah, there you go.
And they had that Shetland pony, and they learned how to ride horses. And then after that, then he got us, all of us, a horse. So we each had a horse.
Yeah.
And then we went all kinds of places on those horses. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
How did you meet your spouse?
It's amazing. You would be surprised. It's just the way I met my husband is I was in high school. I just got into high school and I was in 10th grade. And I was walking down the hall and I just went to the office and got all my books. It was the first day of school. I got all my books and I had a stack of books like this and all my stuff from the office. And I was walking down the hall, and just as I got to the corner, to go around the corner, to go down the other hall to my first class, this guy come around the corner of that hall, and he ran right into me, and he knocked all my books and my boyfriend out of my arms onto the floor.
She wasn't carrying her boyfriend.
I wasn't carrying my boyfriend, but I dumped him in a hurry after my sweetheart here knocked the books out of my hand. And when I dropped my books, he immediately went down and started picking up the books and handing them to me. And he looked up at me, and when he did, and our eyes met, game over. I just knew I was going to marry him. And I was just so excited. And he kept handing me my books, and I kept looking in his eyes, and I kept thinking, he is the most handsome man I've ever seen. I was so excited and everything. And
She hadn't been out much.
he finally got through piling my books up, and I couldn't say anything. And he kept saying, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. And then he walked off to the office. And I stood there and I just watched him walk away. I couldn't believe what I saw. He was so handsome. And so yeah, I was going to go back and see if I could buy another pencil at the office, and I decided, no, that would make me look like a fool. So I went ahead and walked down the hall. I ran into my friend, and her name was Joyce. And she says, what are you smiling about? And I says, I just ran into the guy I'm going to marry. And she says, what? And I says, yeah. I says, I just ran into him. He knocked all my books out of my hand, and I'm going to marry him. And she says, oh, that's so funny. She laughed, and she says, how do you know you're going to marry him? And I says, because when I looked into his eyes, God told me I was going to marry him, not to worry about it. And that's it. And it happened. We dated I didn't see him again until, I think it was the next year. And it was like in April, the first part of the next year. And he come, I was standing there, he just come down there, walking down there, and he put out his hand and took my hand, and I was like, oh. And he asked me for a date. And I thought, where in the world did he get that idea? And he was asking me for a date. I thought, wow, this is weird. And so we started dating. And then it was, about a year later, we got married.
2 or 3 years later, I was in the army for a couple of years before we got married.
Oh, could have been. But I thought I got married that day. Guess I'll tell you about it. Then we got married. He was going to officer candidate school. And then he came back, and it was in just before Christmas, and he invited me to go out with him. So we went out on the hill out here, and he asked me to marry him.
That sounds kind of ominous.
He begged me to marry him.
Don't believe all of this. Yeah.
And
I actually gave her a ring, yes.
he gave me a ring. And I guess he thought that if he gave me a ring, I'd wait for him for a year while he's in Vietnam, because he knew he was going to Vietnam. And I told him, I says, I looked at the ring, gave it back to him, and I says, no, I don't want a ring. I want a husband. And he was like, well, I can't get married till I get, and I says, yeah, you can. I says, we can go down to the courthouse, get the judge, we will get married in 5 minutes. And I says, and I'm not taking your ring. I'm not going to wait for you another year. I've already waited for him for two years, I think he's in service. And so he finally decided he was trapped. and so he said, okay, and he said, well, I don't have time because I only got 30 days leave, and I don't have time for a wedding. And I said, we're not going to have a wedding. We're going to go to the courthouse, and we're going to go to the judge down there, and he will marry us. We don't have to have a reception. We don't have to have none of that. And I says, I don't care. I want a husband. I don't want a promise. I says, I'm not going to wait for you for 2 years while you're in Vietnam.
I had a very dangerous job, and I knew that the chances were really good that I might not come back, or I might be crippled or maimed. And so I told her, I said, I don't feel good about getting married with that hanging over me, but I said, I want you to wait. And she says no. She said, from my perspective, she said, if you do get wounded bad, and if you're in the hospital or something, I don't have any link to you to where I could get in to even see you. She said, I'm going to be your wife or I'm not. And so we had 30 days. We got married within about 4 or 5 days.
Well,
this was over Christmas.
While that was going on, I had his arm back behind his back, and I was twisting it.
She was.
He was, oh.
She was, yeah. Those are our wedding pictures. That's as good as we got. We got married. We got married at the courthouse in Carbon County by the Judge Keller. They called him the cowboy judge. He was from San Juan County originally, and he wore cowboy boots and a hat all the time, and he was perfect. And we went and was married in the judge's chambers there, and that was all we got. We didn't. Nobody took a picture or nothing. Our parents and stuff was there, but nobody took a picture. That's as good as we got. Me in my uniform, and that's her at her desk in Green River at the missile base.
But that's not all. Guess what?
What?
Now, we got married on the 30th of December, and do you know what? The whole world celebrates for our wedding
Every year.
every year.
Hey.
And we don't have to do anything. We can just go anywhere, and we just got a party going. And everybody is just blowing their little
Everybody else
stupid
calls it
whistles
New
and-
Year's, but we that's our. Yeah.
Hey.
So,
I tell people that I did that just so I could get the tax deduction for the year.
Mother McCourt, when did you decide to join the military?
I wanted to join the military when I got out of high school, but the Vietnam War was starting, and a friend and I was going to go join the Marine Corps, and my dad had been in the Navy, and he was one of the guys that was putting the Marines on the beaches in World War II, and he told me I wasn't going to join the Marine Corps, so I just stayed home until I got drafted, and they were drafting all of the young guys then, and so I got drafted into the Army, and I was 19 when I got drafted, and I went in, and in basic training I qualified for officer candidate school, and they sent me to officer candidate school, and I'd been in the Army for 10 months and 10 days, and they commissioned me a lieutenant, and so I was an officer after that. I spent another couple of years. I spent about 6 months in Texas with the 2nd Armored Division, and then they sent me to Vietnam, and I spent almost 13 months in Vietnam.
What are some of the biggest lessons you've learned from serving?
I learned responsibility big time. I learned what duty is. I learned what sacrifice is. I learned, I already was quite a patriot, but I have a deeper appreciation for America now and the freedoms we have and stuff. I really do. I saw some young men die fighting for this country, and it just broke my heart. And I really honor the flag. You see, I got a big flag out here in front of the house and stuff, and we both of us, we've been very active in politics up until just the last few years. We were members, Tea Party members back in 2009 and stuff, and we went to a lot of rallies and lands issue things and stuff up at the state capitol and everything. But we haven't done a lot of that here lately. But that's what the military teaches people, is it's all about patriotism, and it's all about service and sacrifice. It really is.
Can you share some of your experiences from Vietnam?
I got to Vietnam just as the Tet Offensive was started, and I don't know if you guys know what that was, but they fought a battle. It started on the 30th of January. That was the day that we got married. That battle started, and it lasted for about 4 or 5 months. It was just a continuous. It was the biggest event of the war, and I got there right after that started, and I went right into the battle as a replacement for a guy that got killed. And I was really lucky because I spent 4 months there on an armored vehicle. I was the forward artillery observer. I was the guy that was directing all of the artillery and some of the airstrikes and stuff for this cavalry squadron. We were armored cavalry, and we were right at the head of that front of that battle the whole time, because we had the big guns. They had the tanks and stuff, and I could drop artillery, and we anybody who got in trouble, they called us, and we went up and helped them out. And so it was vicious. It lasted a long time. Then I went back. They sent me to a gun battery for a little while, and then I volunteered to go back to the cavalry because the artillery liaison guy was killed. And so I went and took his place, and I spent my last 4.5 months flying in a helicopter with the colonel. He was the commanding officer of that squadron, cavalry squadron, and I sat right at his elbow and directed shell fire from that helicopter and stuff, and I coordinated all of his artillery activities and stuff for all of their operations and everything. And so I had a crew of guys under me and stuff then, and then when I got done, I come out of there. I wasn't hurt. I was never hurt. I was hit 3 times. I was never hurt. God was good to me, and I came home and got out. I turned out a promotion to captain to get out. They was going to promote me to captain if I'd stay a year, and I told them, no, I've had enough. I'm going. I came back. So.
What did you do for education or career?
Me, I always wanted to be an archaeologist. I've studied archaeology and anthropology and stuff all my life, and I went to the University of Utah when I got out of the Army. I was too young to get a degree before I went in the service, so I had to wait till after. And I went to the University of Utah and I got a degree in anthropology. And anthropology is the base foundation I had to have for archaeology, because archaeology was a graduate degree. But by the time I got that degree, we had 2 little boys, and it was getting really tough. And so I gave it up, and we come back here, and I went back to the coal mines. I'd worked in the coal mines for a couple of years while I was going to college here in town, and my family and her family had both been coal miners forever. I was the 4th generation in my family to go into the coal mines, and I came back and got a coal mine job, but because I had a college degree, I got an office job. So I had an office, and I had a desk and a telephone, and I went in the mines once in a while to take samples. I was their quality control guy, and I ran the coal lab where we tested all that, the coal test, facility and that. So I worked 30 years for the coal mines.
Brother McCourt, how did you become an author?
An author? I lost a job. they blew up a coal mine here in Carbon County. It was the Willow Creek mine. You might have seen it on TV, you guys, way back when. It killed some people and burned it. I was working there, and they had to shut the mine down, and they laid us all off. I lost my job on my 54th birthday. And they told me they had a job for me in Colorado if I wanted to go, but I didn't want to go. And so, Jeannie, bless her heart, the house is paid for, the kids are raised, and she says, I can feed us. And she says, you've always wanted to write, let's see what you got. So I sit down at my computer, and I've written 8 books now and published them, and that's, I've had to self-publish most of my books. Publishers are really hard to find, but I've made it work, and I've sold almost pretty close to 30,000 books now out of the back of my truck. And they've got a write-up on me at the BYU. It was at, actually it was the Deseret News. It's a couple of years ago, one of the reporters come down here and wrote a story, and he called it the Bard of Carbon County. If you type that into Google, it'll bring that story up, and I explained it all to him. He took some pictures of us here at the house and all that stuff, and talking about this weird guy in Carbon County that sells books in the back of his truck all over southern Utah. So.
Can you tell us about the title? Like, can you tell us the titles of your books and
Sure.
what they're about?
I was lucky enough to work for the Nutter Ranch when I was 16 years old. I wanted to be a cowboy. I used to ride the rodeos a little bit when I was really young, and before I went in the Army. But I worked for that ranch, and I went out there to be a cowboy, and I ended up being a hay hand, and I didn't like it much, but I stuck it out. And I wrote a book about that. And it's funny. It's all from the perspective of that wannabe cowboy that was out there working with these mean old bachelors and stuff. And it's called The Split Sky. I had a real remarkable religious experience out there, and the split sky had to do with it. And so you got to read the whole book before you get to what the split sky is about. But I wrote that book, and then the second one I wrote was about. When I was a little kid, I spent time down in Lake Powell. It wasn't Lake Powell then, there wasn't a lake then, but it was Glen Canyon. My grandparents lived at a uranium mill down there, and my grandmother ran the boarding house, and my grandfather and 3 uncles worked at the uranium mill. And I was just a little boy, 5, 6 years old down there, and I loved my grandmother, and I just enjoyed that so much, and I got to see the times, the people, and then that's really unique now because very few people got to see that canyon before that lake was there, and I'm one of the people who did. And I wrote a book about it. It's called White Canyon, remembering the little town at the bottom of Lake Powell, and that was all about my grandparents and stuff. Then I wrote a book about Vietnam, and I told the whole story about that. And then I wrote.
That book is called The Soldier's
To Be a Soldier.
To Be a Soldier.
To Be a Soldier, yeah. And then I wrote a book about Cass Height. There was the guy that settled it. There used to be a little town of Height. It was right across the river from White Canyon down there in Lake Powell and that. And the guy was Cass Height. He was an old prospector that settled down there. And I wrote a kind of a biography about him. Did quite a bit of research and stuff. And I wrote that. I called it King of the Colorado. The story of Cass Height. And then I had a company from Denver contact me, and they wanted me to write a history of Moab just for the tourists. Just a real quick, fun, short stories to tell the history of Moab because they were selling for the tourists down there. And they published that book, but I did that. It's called The Moab Story, Cowpokes to Bike Spokes, and we've sold quite a few of them. And then I wrote a book about Bill Tibbetts. He was a guy that grew up in Moab and got to be an outlaw and hid out on the Robber's Roost for several years, and the sheriff could never find him. And it was his son that brought me the story. And we wrote that story, and we got Canyonlands Natural History Association to publish that one. And we've sold a lot of those. We've sold over 14,000 of that one book. And then I wrote for the newspaper for a while, for on and off for 5 or 6 years. And I made a collection of my newspaper columns. I was writing a weekly column. I called it the Wasatch Behind, and little play on words there. And I took some of my best columns and made a whole book out of them. That's the last one I published. I think I missed one in there too. Which one is it? Oh, the Elk Mountain Mission. That was Brigham Young sent a bunch of missionaries down to Moab in 1854, 1855, and they didn't do well down there, and the Indians chased them out, and they had some people killed, and it was really an adventure, but nobody knew it had happened. And Wade Allenson from Farron, he was a historian that got all of the journals together, and I transcribed all of the journals and wrote the book, and well, we're selling a lot of those. It's quite a pioneer story that nobody in Utah knew about or remembered, and so yeah. So that one's out there now too. We're in the 4th publishing for that one. We published it 4 times, printed it 4 times now. So we have a route we do. We do 4 or 5 times a year. We'll go clear down through Hanksville and clear down into Blanding and Moab, and I do a lot of stuff in Moab. I've sold a lot of books in Moab, the tourists down there and stuff. We go through Torrey and Bicknell, and we just make big loops down there and stop at all of the convenience stores and the, you know, we've got a lot of customers that buy from us. I'll just go in there and stock them up, and then we do that.
What are your hopes for your children or grandchildren?
I'm hoping that they can have a good life, and that they'll go to church and do what they're supposed to do, and get an education, and lead healthy and prosperous lives. I do. That's about as good as it can get. You know, everybody gets to make their own choices, so I'm not going to make choices for them, but I just want them to be happy and have a good time. What about you?
I want them to be rich, famous, and come and visit me a lot.
That's it. Yeah.
That's good.
Next question is, if you could go back in time knowing all that you know now, what advice would you give to your 20-year-old self?
Don't do it.
You was 20 when you got married, is that what you mean? Yeah. You know, I don't have a lot of regrets. I've made some mistakes, everybody does, but I really don't know that I would change anything that I've done. You know, I could have maybe done things better, but as far as the choices and the path I took and stuff, I have no regrets. I really don't. It took me a long time to go back to church. I dropped out of church when I was 16, and I didn't go for 20 years. I was 36 when I went back, and I had to make that trip though to pick up my dear wife here. She wasn't a member of any religion, and I picked her up in my travels, and we were married for about 16, 18 years before we got you and the boys baptized. And I had quite a spiritual experience that turned that around too, but we won't get into it here.
If you'd like to share it, we'd like to hear it, but you don't
It's
feel
all right.
obligated.
God gave me a wake-up call, and I realized that I needed to go back to church, and so I went back and took my dear wife and my 4 sons, and we ended up going to the temple, and within a couple of years, and after that it was, in another 9 years, I was the bishop of the Lord. So it was a complete conversion. It absolutely was. We were never bad people or anything. We just didn't go to church. We just, you know. So. But now we do.
How has that decision changed you?
What's changed our lives? It's just totally changed our lives. We had to give up a lot of friends, and some of the activities and stuff we used to.
Let me tell you something about church.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a child growing up, the only person in my family that was a member of the church was my dad. And he absolutely didn't like LDS people. And he was the only one there. And so none of us in my family got to have much to do with church. Well, when I got to be like, I was 20 years old or something like that, and my sister she's 4 years older than me, and she came and she says, I really want to go to church. Will you go with me? And I said, really? You want to go to church? And she says, yeah, I think, because she had 2 little girls. And her husband had been killed. And so she wanted to go to church, so...
In fact, that's how I started going back to church. Actually, maybe we need to tell that whole story. Go ahead, you tell her about it. But
yeah, but everything you say is a lie. So anyway, so I got my sister. We was gonna go to church, and so we got all ready to go, and we headed for church, and we got down to the church, and nobody was there. And we was, well, what happened and what time is it? We looked, and so then I said, well, maybe sometimes they have this thing what they do, and they all go to another church. So let's go down and look at the other church. So we went there, and nobody was there. Nobody was in any of the churches. And then we didn't dare go back to my family because none of them went to church, and we knew they'd make fun of us, so we just went driving around for a while, and then went back, and when we got home, then he says, well, how was church? Oh, it was fine. We just loved it, just because. And I think they knew that we didn't go to church because they was watching conference on TV. But they didn't know what conference was anyway. So that was my first trip to go to church. And it was
The 1 week of the year.
that 1 week. 1 week had to be that one.
her little sister's husband was killed in the mine. And
Coal mine.
It was the same mine I worked at. We got the phone call that he'd been killed, and so we ran right to her house. She had 2 of the most beautiful little girls, just little kids. And I went in and I said, "What can I do for you? What can we do?" And she was just she didn't have any religion. So she was just terribly upset. She was just really feeling bad. And I said, "What can we do?" And she says, "What do I tell these kids?" She says, "They want to know why Dad isn't here. They want to know when he's coming home." She says, "What do I tell them? What do I tell them?"
Her little girls was 3 and 1.
So I put the little girls on the sofa there, and I knelt down where I was at eye level, and I started to talking to those little girls. And I hadn't been to church for 20 years myself, but I started telling them everything I learned in primary about where Dad was, and all about life and death, and I started telling those little girls, I said, "Your dad can still see you. He can still help you out and stuff, but you won't be able to see him. Isn't that funny? And this is how it is," and all of that stuff. And I said, "You'll see him again," and all of that stuff. And while I was there, looking at those 2 little kids on my knees, I'm sorry.
Cry baby.
I just had this, I didn't hear a voice, but it was just impressed on my mind. Do you believe what you're telling these kids, or are you lying to them? And so I ended up in an argument with myself and said, "Sure, I believe this." And the next thing I felt was, why don't you do something about it? And that just took the wind out of me, because I knew who was talking to me. And I felt so bad and so guilty. And so after the funeral was all over and all of that stuff, that's what I told her. I says, I feel really stupid, because she had the missionaries coming here, teaching her while I was at work, because I was arguing with them when they would come in the evenings. I knew just enough about the church. I could almost make missionaries cry. I was a real jerk. I mean, I was bad. And so she had the missionaries come here during the day while I was at work, but she couldn't get baptized without my consent, and I felt terrible. And I told her, I said, "I'm really sorry, but I've got to start going to church." And she kind of said, "Well, you know, good luck. It was too late for me, but she finally came around, bless her heart, and we got the boys to go. And I didn't have the Melchizedek priesthood. I was able to baptize them, but somebody else had to confirm them, and McFarland's helped us out with that a lot. We were living here then, and like I said, the rest is history. We committed, and we went through the temple. We went through the Provo temple because Manti was closed. And we got sealed and got our kids sealed to us and stuff. And I don't think we've hardly missed a Sunday since. Very few.
And then after that, we worked at the temple for 2 years.
About 2.5 years, yeah. As temple workers.
Mentor.
It was the most amazing experience because we were working 2 days a week at the temple, two shifts. We'd work a Thursday night shift and a Friday morning shift at the Manti Temple, and then we'd come home and spend all day Sunday in church at the jail. We was taking the church to the jail.
We were bipolar.
Yeah, we said it was like being bipolar, but we had some wonderful spiritual experiences at the jail. This woman here could really relate to a lot of those kids. She grew up in a very dysfunctional family in a terrible home situation, and with alcoholics and everything. And
It was just the drinking. My folks drink on weekends and stuff, and parties, and that was it.
And so she could really relate to some of those women that were in the jail, and she could straighten them out. And she's tough enough to where when they would start giving her these sob stories, she would say, "No, honey, no, that's a choice you made. Don't you blame that on your mother." You know, and she could straighten them out. And they come to love her. They just really respected her, and it was great. We had a wonderful experience there.
What are you passionate about?
I'm passionate about patriotism. I'm passionate about my country. That's a big part of my focus right now. Is that I've always liked archaeology. That's a hobby, but my focus has really been on the country, and ever since I was in the military.
What advice would you give to the upcoming generation concerning that? Concerning your
it's very important that like you guys homeschooling that you get the real American history. They're not teaching the real stuff in a lot of these public schools now. This is a wonderful country. God was behind the founding of this country, and the Constitution was inspired, and I honestly believe all of that. And this is the best place in the world to live. And so honor the flag, honor being a citizen, and that's the best I can say. Be proud of America, who she is, what it is.
I'm just really passionate about this country, about this area. And every time we go driving, I have to say, look at those mountains. Do you guys look at the mountains?
Yeah.
I said, look at those mountains. Aren't they just beautiful? And I says, I never realized that we lived in such a beautiful place, because all the time I was a kid, I was always doing something. And then we got kids, and then I was always doing something with the kids and all that stuff. And now we go for a drive in the car, and I can actually look and see where we're going. I'm not in the diaper bag, I'm not, and then it's just, this is such a beautiful country. The mountains around us, and it's just all the way to Salt Lake, going up that canyon and that. And if you want to go down on the desert, you just get the whole enchilada, because everything is beautiful.
Within 30 minutes right here, you can change your scenery completely. You can go to Huntington Canyon, you get the pines and the quaky trees and the mountains. If you go due south, you can be in the Red Rocks, just like Moab, in half an hour from here. You've got 9 Mile Canyon north of us. You can hit the desert out here to the east, towards Green River and that. You can. It just depends on which direction you point your vehicle. In 30 minutes, you can change your whole environment. It's amazing. You can't do that in most places.
Yeah, that is amazing.
Yeah.
The only thing that's bad about it right now, this time of life, is there's a lot of people out there now. When we was out there, We are very seldom saw anybody. We just had it all to ourselves.
The tourists all started on the desert after they got cell phones and motorbikes.
Oh.
Before then, we had it to ourselves. There was
Yeah.
nobody out there. We'd go out and spend it. We'd go down here on Buckhorn Wash, spend Saturdays, and we could go down there and spend a whole Saturday afternoon and never see another person. Nobody. We actually ran tours after I lost my job and I was starting to write books. We did tours for 4 years professionally. We advertised on magazines and stuff, and we were taking people from all around the world and going to 9 Mile and the San Rafael swell. We'd take them over on the San Rafael and the Wedge Overlook and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, we did
He
that.
did some of it himself because I was
She was still working at the bus garage.
I was a transportation supervisor then.
We're just saying that this is a remarkable place to live. It just really is. And we've got pictures and stuff. We used to ride our horses along the top of Castle Valley Ridge over here, where you can look off of both sides into, and over off the other side of the mountain or down into the valley here.
How have your religious beliefs impacted your life?
My religious beliefs changed my life. After we started going back to church, we had just a total attitude adjustment, I guess. It was just the sun come out. It was awesome. I dropped out when I was 16 because I was being told all the time. It was right after these big nuclear bombs and stuff was made, and they kept telling us in this little church I went to, the people that were in the charge of the young men, young women kept telling us that we were the last generation. We were going to see the world burn like stubble. I got tired of it. And when I was 16, I just dropped out. I said, I'm not going to listen to that anymore. I'm going to have a future. I didn't go back for 20 years. And that's that's kind of a bad deal, but I had to find my way back, and God took me back. I told you when I talked to those 2 little girls. And so when I picked her up in my travels, and she's been wonderful. Like I said, temple workers, and we was doing a lot of. In fact, we were really disappointed when they called me to be the Elders Quorum president right after President Nelson got in, because they made us quit the temple job and the other. We were really enjoying what we were doing, and we'd been doing it about 2.5 years to go to the temple and then come back to the jail and stuff.
Manti.
Yeah, the Manti temple. But we had to, that's where the live sessions. We had to do the parts.
right.
We had to memorize the
I
parts.
got to be Eve.
Yeah.
Can't top that.
Yeah.
She was a good one too. But
You really can't.
yeah, but that's after I'm very comfortable with the church now, and I've found my way back, and she took to it like once we got her baptized, and especially after the temple and stuff. She's been just wonderful.
Yeah.
So it changed our lives. It really did. And I recommend it to everybody. I've told everybody to make sure your kids go get some religion, go to church. It's just been amazing. God's been with us. I really believe I was spared when I was in Vietnam. Like I said, I was actually hit with shrapnel twice and hit in the arm with a bullet. It bruised my arm. But it never broke the skin. I never lost a drop of blood. It was amazing. And so God's been with us. He's been with us through our marriage, and even now. I mean, we're, it's incredible. But God will let you live your life without Him if you don't want to live your life without Him. If you want Him there, you got to ask Him. You got to pray and say, "I need your help, and please." And He's there if you do. I found that out the hard way. I told in my soldier book that after I got in Vietnam and been there for a little while, I didn't pray for a long time. I felt like a hypocrite asking God to save me while I was doing what I was doing, and I just told Him, I said, I can't do this, so it's up to you. I said, whatever happens, happens. It's in your hands. I can't stop what I'm doing. These people are all depending on me, and all of our lives depend on some of the things I'm doing here. I mean, I could put down more firepower than that whole unit. I mean, with just my radio. And but I said I got to keep doing what I'm doing, and I can't help it. And so I'm not going to pray anymore. I'm not going to ask you. But my family was praying back here. My grandmother, my maternal grandmother, was getting the family together every Sunday at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and they would kneel in a circle.
Not just here. There's family in Texas, all around. They were all on the game. They had to be there at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and we were all going to pray. I'd go to his parents' house.
What tidbit of wisdom would you share with the world?
God lives. Jesus is the Christ. You know, there's a life after this life. I'll tell you about another experience just a couple of years ago. I had to go in for thyroid surgery. I've got a condition now I've been treated for now a couple of years. I might have got it in Vietnam. The Agent Orange stuff. I don't know. My thyroid went haywire, and I had to go have some of my thyroid removed and that. And when they put me out, when I came to in the recovery room, I was just so excited. I was just elated. I never felt so good. I looked over and there was a nurse standing there, and she was doing some things on the computer, and I said, I'm awake. And she says, oh yeah, okay, good. She'd come over there, and she says, how do you feel? And I said, I've never felt better. I said, I've been with my grandmother. And the doctor went in to tell her and my son that was with her that the surgery had gone well and everything.
Our son.
Yeah, our son. And he came in. He was grinning, and he said, "We had a remarkable experience." He said he was talking to his grandmother all the time we were operating on him, and some place called White Canyon, and that's where I was. I don't remember a thing that was said, but I know she was there, and it was down in that beautiful place where I was at when I was a kid. And I spent that hour visiting with my grandmother.
That's where he lost his thyroid.
And I cannot remember anything about it, but I just knew when I woke up, I knew I'd been talking to her.
Wow.
And I told the nurse that, and then independently, the doctor came in and told and then they're not supposed to do that.
That doctor was so excited, though. He was just grinning like a fool, and he says, he's doing good, he's great. He's been to White Canyon. I says, really? And he says, yeah, you know where White Canyon's at? And I says, well, I've heard about it. He'd been down there with his grandmother. I says, yeah.
Wow.
Isn't that something?
That's amazing.
Yeah, and so he was laughing about it, and then I asked him later when I had to go in for a follow-up, I said, what did I tell you guys? And he says, I don't know what you're talking about. He wasn't supposed to say anything to him, you know, I know that, and he wouldn't fess up, so I gave him a copy of my book about my grandmother and that, and I said, well, here, read this, and I said, you'll understand where I was at. I don't know if he ever read it or not, he never followed up.
Oh, wow.
He probably doesn't know how to read.
The doctor, yeah, the ones I go
All
to.
those doctors, you never know, you know.
We've had some remarkable experiences like that. I mean, I could go on and on and on. I met one of my oldest grandson before he was born.
Wow.
I didn't see him. He was, you know, there's quite a story behind that too. In fact, we just had to send that to him. Yeah. His mother had preeclampsia, and she had lost a couple of babies, and she didn't have any. I mean, she was pregnant twice, and she lost them. And she was pregnant the third time, and our son was being sent overseas. He was in the Army.
That's our oldest son.
Our oldest son. And he was going over to be in the Sinai Desert with he was a member of that peacekeeping force that was between the Egyptians and the Israelis. They were over on the Sinai Desert, and he was leaving to go over there. and they just found out that she was pregnant. And she was just really distraught because she says, "My hell, you know, you can't leave me now." And he had to. He was a sergeant in the Army, and we had to take him up so that they could leave and put him on an airplane and stuff. And so I had Grandma and my daughter-in-law in the car, and I'm driving home, and it was a sad trip from the airport. And I was really upset by the time we got home too. And we let her out, and she went in the house crying, and we could run home. And
Let me out.
I kicked her out here at the house, and I says, "I'm sorry, but I said I do this once in a while." I said, I got to go have a talk with the boss. I got to go talk to God. I do that, and I go out in the cedar trees. I find that sacred grove, and so I drove out the canyon, and I climbed up to a spot I know that's really beautiful and nice, and I knelt down and I started to pray, and I had given her a blessing before we went to the airport. And I just felt prompted to tell her that everything was going to be okay. That she was going to carry the baby this time, and it was going to be born healthy, and everything was going to be fine. I told her that in the blessing. But on the way back, by the time we got back here, I was starting to doubt myself. I've never doubted God, but I doubt, did I do the right thing? Did I say the right thing? And so I went out and I got down on my knees out there in the cedar trees, and I just started begging God. I said, "Please honor what I've promised her. I know you can do it, but," and I said, I'm not questioning you, God. I'm questioning, did I do the right thing? Did I just want that so bad that I said it, or was I really prompted to say that? And while I was there, I felt a presence. I didn't open my eyes. I didn't look up, but somebody was standing by me. And when that happened, I think it's Isaiah, "Unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given." It just started going through my mind, and the son came out, and I thought, thank you, there's my answer. And when I finished that prayer, I got up and looked around. Nobody's around, and I knew there wouldn't be. I ran back to where my pickup truck was, and I come home and I just skidded into the yard here. I should have got a speeding ticket, and I told her, I says, "Get in the truck, we got to go talk to Wendy." And so she, what? And I says, "Come on, I'll tell you when I tell her." And we went over to her house, and she was still moping around, feeling really bad, and I walked in, and I said, "Sit down." And she sat down, and I did just like I did with those little girls. I knelt down, and I took her by the hands, I looked her right in the face, and I said, "You are not only going to have a healthy baby, you're going to have a healthy baby boy." And she said, "How do you know?" And I said, "I met him just a little while ago." And she took a lot of comfort from that. And later, about 6-7 months later, when that baby was born, we went up to the hospital. He came back from the service in time. He got it. He was able to come home for that.
Got to leave.
Yeah, just on leave. And one of the nurses come out and she says, "Well, you got a healthy baby boy." And we gave each other a big high five. And then we both broke down and cried like babies. Because we knew him. It was a remarkable. I've had several experiences like that. It's just been amazing. Some people might not understand all of this stuff, but I'll tell you what, it's real. It's true. They'll never convince me.
Are you generally optimistic or pessimistic about the future?
I'm very optimistic. I know God's in charge. It's all pre-planned. Life is a test. We're just here to take a test. And we get to choose. We get to make choices. And it's all worked out. It'll be all right. God's got a plan for every one of us. And we just need to recognize Him and ask for His help, and He'll guide us through it. But we're here just to take a test. It's just like going to school. Every time you reach a different point in your life, it's like turning the page in that test book. There's just another set of questions that comes with you get out of school, you get changes, you got this to do, and then you get married, and you got these questions that you take, and that's what it is. It's just like taking a big test. So I don't worry about global warming. I don't worry about nuclear bombs, none of that stuff, because I know who's in charge and I know how it ends. I've read the Bible, and it's in the end, Jesus is going to come back, and it's going to be great, and we're going to have 1,000 years of peace, and it's going to be great.
Yeah.
And it would be so nice to be alive when that happened. It would be.
Yeah.
Let me tell you another quick story. I saw this years ago on TV. They'd had that big earthquake in Alaska, huge earthquake up there. Way back, it was 59, 60, something like that. They had this woman there, and they were interviewing her about the earthquake, because the whole town was knocked down. And she said, when this happened, she said the whole house was coming apart. And she said, I grabbed my 2 little kids and I ran outside to get away from the debris and stuff. And she said the ground was just splitting up and everything around. She said, I knew it was the end of the world. She said, this had to be the end. And so she says, I dropped down to my knees, I hugged my little babies, and I looked up to see him. She said he wasn't there. But she said, I had the most peaceful feeling come over me. And she said, I felt just absolute comfort and peace. And she says, losing my house now doesn't even bother me after feeling that. She says, we can live through this too. And she says, I was given a witness there that I looked up for him and he knew that I believed in him. And she said, he gave me a hug back. So those things happen.
Yeah. It's a beautiful story.
Yeah. Well, you've made a mess out of it here. I haven't been like this for a while.
What excites you the most about the future?
Excites me about it?
Yeah.
The future is going to be beautiful because Jesus is going to be in charge of the world. It's going to be a little while before that happens. You guys are going to be able to get up, grow up, and be adults and all that before it happens. But that's something to look forward to, because in the end, that's how it's going to be. There's going to be 1,000 years of peace, 1,000 years of happiness with no evil on the world. I can't even imagine what we could do if we had 1,000 years without any evil people or bad things happening. And I think that's something to really look forward to. I'm very optimistic about it. I believe it's going to happen.
That's good.
How about you? Comments?
Well, I think my future's pretty short because I'm old now. I'm 70-something. And, but I can look back at my life and I don't have any regrets, and I'm happy, and I'm not afraid of the future, of the end time, when I get to go home. I'm looking forward to it because it's something that everybody does, and I don't have any fear or any regrets. I've never really done anything bad. I know I've made some missteps sometimes, but it wasn't anything that I did on purpose, and I'm really proud of that I could live as long as I have, and I can look back and I can't have anything that regrets that I've ever done. I've done just about every job there is for women in the church. I've done all of that, primary and
Even in the temple.
even at the temple. I worked in the temple, and I got to be Eve,
Yeah.
and it was just amazing. It was
Yeah.
back in the old days when you actually did the parts and everything. And so, I don't know, I guess I've done it all.
Yeah.
And now I just gotta wait my turn. And I'm not afraid. I've had a great life.
Good.
I've really lived a great life. I've had the best husband. Don't tell him that. But
I'd like that in writing, please.
you're gonna wait a while. But we've had a great marriage. We've done some amazing things. So I'm happy.
We celebrated last December. We celebrated our 56th wedding anniversary. So.
That's Great number.
And I've just about got him housebroke.
Not
So
quite.
work on that.
Not quite. Don't get ahead of your skis there.
And then we had four sons, and they're all good people. They're all doing the best, and they're honest. They're good stand-up people. They work hard, so we're proud of them.
Yeah, we're proud of them. They've done well. They really have. Yeah.